Our third speaker in the practitioner section is Erin Myers Madeira. Erin is a senior advisor at the Nature Conservancy, specializing on the role of forests in climate change mitigation. And I hope she's going to tell us about some very, very innovative work that TNC is doing in Brazil, where they bring together livestock productivity and avoided deforestation in one context. No? Please.
Great, thank you. And thank you both to CCAFS and to the World Bank for having us here today. For those of you who don't know us, the Nature Conservancy, we are an international environmental NGO. We're based in the United States, but we operate in 35 countries. We have been around for about 60 years, but have been working on agricultural issues for about 30 years. Our deepest experience is in the U.S., working on soil conservation and water quality in the Corn Belt. We've also been in Brazil for 15 years, working on beef and soy in the Amazon and the Cerrado. And so today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of our work in Brazil on sustainable landscapes. And share some of our specific work on sustainable intensification in the cattle industry. And so we've been working on sustainable intensification in the states of Mato Grosso and Pará in Brazil. So what do I mean by sustainable intensification? It is, how do we improve productivity on a given area of land without having associated habitat loss? And how do we reduce on-farm impacts? And so those three factors come together. And so where we've been working in Mato Grosso and Pará, we've seen increases in productivity and reductions in habitat loss. We have not been working on the on-farm impacts as much, and that's the next phase of some of this work. So from our experience, what does it take to achieve sustainable intensification, to achieve sustainable landscapes? And there are different ways you can cut it, but a helpful way for us to look at it is we've identified 5 factors. One, and we hear this commonly, are demand signals, coming what is their demand for sustainable production from companies, from actors on the consumer end of the supply chain. And while that's really important, and that creates an enabling condition, that's not going to get us to actual sustainable production. So what else do we need? Incredibly important, we need supportive regulatory frameworks and governance systems. And that in Brazil, some of the keys have been around monitoring and near real-time monitoring of deforestation on private lands, as well as enforcement of the forest code. You also need technical assistance for producers. I think, as Jeff highlighted in his presentation, we can't expect producers to make this shift to adopt new practices unless they have the support. You also need financial credit and incentives for producers to actually make the investment, and that includes both carrots as well as sticks. And you also need involvement of communities and different stakeholder groups who are incredibly important in terms of the long-term sustainability. And I'm going to talk about how these all came together in one of the places where we work. This is Sao Felix de Xingu municipality in red. It's in the state of Pará. It is 8.4 million hectares. So that's about the size of Portugal. We just heard about Costa Rica, which I think is 5.2 million hectares. So we're talking a big municipality. And in 2009, it had the largest herd of cattle of anywhere in Brazil. It also had the largest deforestation rate in the Amazon. And this, the gentleman on your left, is Don Alcioli. And he was a typical rancher in Sao Felix. He moved there about 30 years ago, bought a piece of land, started to clear it and raise some cattle. He bought the surrounding land as he had children so that they could stay close by. And when we started working with him a number of years ago, he needed more than 1 hectare to produce 1 cow. And that was quite typical for the region. And But then in 2009, a few things happened. So Brazil, as many of you know, began to get serious about cracking down on illegal deforestation. And they had been developing a remote sensing program that could monitor deforestation at a relatively fine resolution. At the same time, they began enforcing their forest code. So this is a regulation that it regulates how much clearing you can have on private property. So within the Amazon, a landholder can only clear 20% of the forest. In the Cerrado, it's 65 to 80%, depending on your proximity to the Amazon. So they began enforcing the forest code. Also, part of the forest code, a key component of that, is the Rural Environmental Registry, or the CAR. And what the CAR is it requires landholders to register their property and their boundaries in this registry. And when you couple that with this monitoring system, it creates accountability for deforestation, and you can bring that down to the farm level. So we had now these supportive policies and governance systems in place in Brazil that really hadn't been there before. In addition, Brazil created a blacklist of the worst deforesting municipalities. And if a municipality was on that list, it meant that they had an embargo on the export of goods outside the municipality, and that they couldn't access credit. And so this had huge impact on the cattle and the beef sector in the municipalities on the blacklist. And Sao Felix de Xingu was at the top of that list. In order to be removed from the blacklist, you had to register 80% of your properties in the CAR. You needed to reduce deforestation by 80%, and you needed to form a pact to end illegal deforestation. So this blacklist, it created the financial incentive to make changes to deforestation rate and make changes to land use in the municipality. But as I said, farmers needed help. They needed help both to change their practices as well as to register their properties in the CAR. And so the Nature Conservancy began working with farmers like Don Alcioli and others on new paddocking practices and fencing, new rotational grazing. Giovanna mentioned that they have been doing a rotational grazing of 2 days per area. This is a little bit of a longer rotation, but it's that same principle. Also introducing new grass varietals. And so when I was down there last year, Don Alcioli was bragging that now on 1 hectare of land, he can produce 3 cattle. I mean, so that is huge, and that's been really a game changer because now he doesn't have any need to continue to expand into the forested land on his property. Also, importantly, ranchers don't usually look to NGOs for technical advice. They look to other ranchers, they look to people in the industry, and we've been working quite a bit with cattlemen's unions, with other ranchers. Don Alcioli himself has become a real advocate for these practices in terms of the extension aspect and making sure other farmers can access these practices. We also, through a different partnership with Cargill in Santarém, a different municipality in Pará, we developed a system to cost-effectively register properties in the CAR. And through that, we gained a lot of experience in terms of how do you do this cost-effectively and how can we scale it up. And I have some of the price figures there, but it's relatively cheap, 10 cents per hectare for a one-time cost, and then 10% of that annually, and have been working to register properties in the CAR. So we have technical assistance in Sao Felix. You also have the other two, so the other 2 factors I mentioned, meaningful engagement of all stakeholders. So in order to get off the blacklist, you have to sign a pact to end illegal deforestation. Some municipalities sign it. It's very straightforward, not a lot of engagement. In Sao Felix de Xingu, they took it very seriously. They formed a commission. They just last week have launched a fund associated with it. But what's been exciting to see is all the different stakeholder groups came together and said, okay, we can do this, but we realize there's going to be costs associated with it, and we need a certain amount of support. And we've been working with them to identify, okay, for different stakeholder groups, what type of support do they need? How can they access that? Is there domestic sources of funding? Is there international potential? Is it carbon related? Is it not? And so there's been a lot of engagement in figuring out how can we get to this goal of ending illegal deforestation sustainably. A lot of the smallholders, cattle just doesn't make sense for them. So how can they make the shift to cacao, which is, there's a high price for cacao, and it's much better for smallholders where labor and accessing labor can be very expensive, and they don't have the ability to do that. And then demand signals. We are just starting a partnership now working with Walmart, who you all know, as well as Marfrig, one of the largest largest slaughterhouses, and working on that specific supply chain. And Walmart has committed to preferentially place beef that is sustainably sourced from Sao Felix in one of their stores. So again, we had all these factors come together in Sao Felix to Xingu, and what you're looking at in this graph is you've seen the deforestation rate go down as the number of properties registered in CAR has gone up. And again, this is just to highlight, we are starting to see the beginning of this shift in Sao Felix, and it's not to say the work is done, but that we've started a great trajectory there. So, Sao Felix to Xingu, this is just one snapshot to highlight how these different factors come together. But if we're really going to address some of the big challenges that we face related to cattle and grazing in Brazil, we need to be thinking, how do we scale this up? And from our analysis, and the analysis that my colleague David Cleary, who's here today, has done, we have identified, or we believe that we can realistically expect to see a 25% increase in productivity per hectare. And what you're looking at here, it's a little confusing, but on the right side, that's showing you how much land do you need to create one cow. And if you see, in some parts of Brazil, you only need 3/4 of a hectare, but in a lot of areas, you need much more than 1 hectare, including in Brazil, in the Amazon and the Cerrado. And so that there is evidence that there's potential to really improve productivity, improve efficiency. And if we can improve productivity by 25%, that would free up 20 million hectares of land for expansion of cropland without any new habitat loss. So I know we're pressed for time here, so just my last slide is, all right, so how do we scale this up? First of all, if you look across Latin America, you have 80% of the Latin American herd is in Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and Argentina. So those are really important places to start. We talked about demand signals, and I think we're seeing a lot in terms of these retail-facing companies now are making commitments. And one of the challenges that we see is, how do we create these supportive regulatory frameworks and governance systems? How do we create these monitoring systems that are linked to enforcement beyond Brazil? And how do you do that in places like Colombia, Argentina, and Mexico? And then also, how do we think about scaling up technical assistance? And in both Colombia and Mexico, they have launched national roundtables, cattle roundtables, and those are potential vehicles. But how are we thinking about really expanding the technical assistance that's needed, as well as the different financial incentives and engaging different stakeholder groups? And I know I'm getting the flag in the back that I'm over time, so I'll save questions about these for the discussion, but thank you.